Hey, hey, welcome everybody. I am so glad you took time out of your busy days to come in and join us here at MTEK. So, hey, congratulations right off the bat to you guys. You're in for a treat today. This is our second annual Emerging Tech Conference that Evotech and Evotech Labs are sponsoring. We've got a terrific lineup set up for you today. This is what we're going to be walking through. You guys have probably seen this, and this is why you're here. We're going to be starting off with a keynote speaker that I'll be introducing in a bit. We've got a venture roundtable where we're going to be featuring some of the top venture investors in the technology industry. They're going to be coming in, digging into trends they're seeing, how things are changing, what world events are causing in the tech space. We're going to have 3 tracks, one on artificial intelligence, one on customer experience, one on security. We have got some terrific thought leaders and startups coming in to talk about each of those. Feel free to skip between any of the sessions that you would like. We're going to have Q&A for most of those sessions, so feel free to use your chat to throw questions at the presenter. We're going to get a little break for lunch. Afterwards, we're going to reconvene with something very, very special. As you folks know, Evotech does have a charitable foundation that we run to help further women in technology. Today, we're going to hone that in a little bit to women in emerging technology. We've got a terrific moderator and 3 very special entrepreneur leaders and emerging tech visionaries that are going to be coming in to speak about some of the particular challenges facing women in emerging tech. We have several sponsors, including the startups that are going to be presenting. We'll have virtual booths that'll be set up where you can go in and go one-on-one with the presenters, dig into an area that you have more questions on, jump into areas that maybe were a little bit unclear, that you've got some particular problems that you're looking to solve in your enterprises. We're going to then go through a session on evaluating emerging technologies and why that is different than evaluating mainstream technologies. Most of us in our day-to-day lives spend a ton of time with mainstream technologies. We read about it in the media and the literature. We have it in our production environments. Yet when it comes time to taking a look at startups, we apply the same rules that we use to evaluate mainstream technology with emerging technology. And quite frankly, it just doesn't work. So we're going to go through a little workshop and talk about how exactly you can evaluate emerging technologies. We're going to have some closing remarks by Evotech's CEO and fearless leader, Cesar Inciso. So look forward to that. I think you're going to really get a kick out of that. Well, up first, it's my pleasure to introduce a industry thought leader, Mr. Chris Laping. He's a 4-time former CIO. He's been at companies like coffee and bagel brands. You would know things like Caribou Coffee, Einstein Bagels. He was the CIO there. GMAC, Stratera, and Red Robin, if you've ever had any of their gourmet, juicy burgers out there. So 4-time CIO. The man cannot hold a job. He has had a ton of experience out there through a number of different areas, but then he left his job behind the desk and went out and actually wrote a best-selling book called People Before Things. And the book dives into 7 reasons why people resist change and what leaders can do about it. He's also been named as one of the 100 IT leaders by Computer World. The Economist has named him one of the top 5 social business leaders. Information Week has named him as a social business technology leader. He's 3 times won awards from InfoWorld. So this gentleman is rather accomplished. So I kind of feel like I should quit talking about him and just him take over the microphone and go through his presentation. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's okay. That just gives more time for Chris to drop some wisdom bombs on you guys. Folks, Mr. Chris Laping.
Mark, thank you. I love the intro that he can't hold a job. That is the perfect way to describe me. So hello, everybody from Denver, Colorado. I am very excited to be here supporting all of you in your Emerging Tech Conference today. And, the holiday season's upon us. So I want to kick off today's conversation by telling you a story about the holiday time. It was actually almost 10 years ago when my wife and I decided that we were going to stop giving our 3 kids Christmas presents. We were tired of them being ungrateful, playing with their toys for just a week or two, and then throwing things into a corner where they would proceed to collect dust. So we said, no more Christmas presents. For now on, when we get to the holiday time, we are going to create experiences and memories that the kids can take with them for life. So we figured when we sat down to tell the kids they weren't going to get their Christmas presents, that we had to go big on the first experience. And we decided we were going to take them to Disney World. So we made this announcement, and our typically ungrateful kids seemed very grateful and excited about going to Disney. And we went and got a 3-park pass and spent about 5 days in Orlando, Florida. And I will tell you, it was a wonderful trip to Disney World. Definitely the happiest place on earth. The one thing, though, that wasn't great was that we went that last week of the year. So it was very busy in the parks, and we stood in a lot of long lines. But it doesn't matter. We still had a great time. And when we went across all the 3 parks, we came to find a ride that was our favorite ride or attraction during the Disney trip that was called the Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster. And that was in Hollywood Studios for those of you who have not visited the park or that attraction. And the Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster, just like its name, is a roller coaster. But unlike most roller coasters, this roller coaster is actually inside of a building. You can't see it when you're standing in line. And of course, we were in line for 2 hours because the parks were really busy, and we were talking to lots of strangers in the room, in the line with us who were telling us how absolutely terrifying the roller coaster was, which we knew had to be somewhat untrue because, people were in line riding it again. But we were enjoying the conversations with people. And here's the thing about the Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster, if you're not familiar with it. The claim to fame for the Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster is that the roller coaster cars, which are formed and fashioned after an Aerosmith rock and roll limousine, when you get in those roller coaster cars and you get inside the building in those roller coaster cars, they take off from 0 to 60 miles an hour in just a little over 2 seconds. And you get shot into this black tunnel. Now, more on that in a minute. You get in line, you're talking to strangers for 2 hours. In the last 10 minutes of your line experience, you're now inside the building. And they have these chain link fences. And for the first time, you're getting a glimpse of these roller coaster cars. And you see people jumping into them. And then you see that roller coaster car just shooting off, which is absolutely terrifying. And I will tell you that it was at that precise moment, standing behind the chain linked fence, that it started to occur to me that this might not be a great idea with my 9-year-old daughter. I have 2 older boys. I wasn't worried about them as much. They're knuckleheads and they needed to be terrified anyway. But my daughter, 9 years old at the time, I thought, I don't know if this is going to be a little bit much. And I remember looking down at her, and she just looked back up at me, and she was just grinning ear to ear. So I knew, cool dad, check. Now I'm still worried about safety at this point. I see it's time for us to jump in the cars. We all are able to fit in the same car. My 2 boys are in the back. My wife is right behind my daughter and I. And they put this really strong harness on top of you. And I started to think to myself, okay, safety. This is going to be safe. Check. And in the roller coaster car, behind your head, there are speakers. And right before the roller coaster car takes off, Steven Tyler, the singer of Aerosmith, starts to yell out in a rock and roll voice a countdown going 5 to 1, which if I had a cool rock and roll voice, I would scream out to you right now. But he started doing the countdown. And at the end of the countdown, you get shot into this black tunnel. And all of these strobe lights are going off. And you immediately hit this upside down loop. Now, here's what I'll tell you. Even though we were waiting for 2 hours to get on this roller coaster, even though for at least 10 minutes of that, I got a chance to see people getting shot off in this car, that at the moment that the roller coaster shot off into the tunnel, it literally took my breath away. Like I couldn't even control it. I like had this deep inhale, and then I feel like I stopped breathing for a few seconds. It was completely breathless. Now, at the same time, my wife, who was sitting in the row behind us, was yelling. And what I will say is my wife and I at the time, we didn't make it a habit of cussing in front of the kids. But my wife was profusely cussing. If she said 7 words, probably 5 of them were an F-bomb, which the kids thought was really funny. So everybody is somewhat terrified by this experience, but we had a great time. We get off the ride, and it turns out that the strobe lights were them taking pictures. So we stood there and we enjoyed the photos. And when that whole experience was over, do you know what we did? We decided we would go back through the experience again. And we went through the whole thing again, 2-hour line, chain link fence, standing behind it, seeing people jump in the cars, me asking myself again, okay, we survived the first time. Should I really be taking the kiddos on this ride a second time? And the second time when we shot into the tunnel, the exact same thing happened to me. I mean, I had experienced the roller coaster and having my breath taken away, and yet I went breathless again. Now, why am I talking about roller coasters and Disney World in the beginning of an emerging tech conference? What does it have to do with you? And here's why I shared this story with you. I shared this story with you because I think the roller coaster is exactly what it's like when you launch emerging technology into your organization. And you're trying to innovate and you're trying to drive change. And ultimately, it takes people's breath away. It just takes their breath away. Like in the roller coaster line, when we talked for hours with people who had been on the ride, who had experienced it before, it still didn't prepare us. And that's just like it is when we're getting ready to roll out technology and innovation in our organizations. Sometimes our organizations know for months, sometimes years, that some kind of transformation or change is going to happen. And just like the chain linked fence, where you get an up close and personal look at the roller coaster, sometimes before we go live with new innovation and change and technology, we have our coworkers, our colleagues, our stakeholders actually test the technology. So they have an up close and personal view of what's going to happen. And with all of that preparation and conversation, we still get to a go live event. And it's like that proverbial roller coaster being shot into the black tunnel. where people's breath is taken away with all of this change and transformation that's happening in the organization. Now, how do I know that change takes people's breath away? That the people that you support in your organizations, how do I know that they generally are averse to change and transformation? And I want to share a few key stats with you. Stat number one comes from Forbes, and what they have researched is that 84% of all companies that attempt digital transformation, they actually fail at it. Gallup reports that 70% of all change initiatives fail. And at the same time, Gallup is reporting that, 70% of the US workforce is disengaged, which I don't think that those two numbers are coincidental. I think that when we drive change into the organizations we serve, that change can be disruptive. And I think that depending on how we handle that change and bring people along with us, we may actually cause people to disengage. Now, another stat to think about is if you go back to 1955, which is when they started publishing the Fortune 500 list. If you look at that original list, only 12% of the companies that were on that list are on the list today. That means there was an 88% topple rate. And if you actually look at that list from 1999 to 2009, which was a pretty dramatic time period in organizations when you think about tech and what was going on at that time, 50% of the Fortune 500 companies toppled off of that list. That suggests to me that organizations in general struggle with change and with innovation. If we were really great with change and we could constantly evolve and reinvent ourselves in our organizations, and we could do that successfully, then the topple rate off the Fortune 500 wouldn't be so great, and these stats here wouldn't be so bad. Now, these stats lined up to what I experienced as a CIO. As a CIO, I became consumed with trying to understand and identify the patterns between my innovation projects that were hugely successful and the ones that were not. And I can tell you in my history and experiences of driving change that there was a large percentage of things that I was rolling out, especially in the early days of my CIO career, that were not going well. And in fact, these stats suggest that if you're going to start some change or innovation tomorrow, if you're going to drive something into your organization that's disruptive, there is a high likelihood that's not going to go well. That movie is not going to end well for you. And this was something that I became very consumed with. I wanted to know why some of my projects succeeded and why so many of them did not. And it turns out that when I started to really focus on this, I mean, getting out of bed and thinking about it and working on it every day, that the patterns started to emerge. And those patterns were very obvious and were very easy. Now, admittedly, as a CIO, I had a little bit of a sophistication bias. I wanted the answer to this to be really complicated, because if the answer was complicated, it would suggest why so many of us fail, that this solution or answer would be way out of reach for most of us. But it turns out it's not complicated. So here's what I'd like to do before I jump into the patterns that I've noticed. I'd like to invite you to open up the chat section and start a chat with me. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about winning. That in your career, when you've been on winning project teams, perhaps a winning technology initiative, a winning innovation project, and you think about what all of those winning teams had in common, what's 1 to 3 words that come to mind that describe what all of those teams had in common? And you can just drop your answer in. Again, I want you to think about all the winning projects you've been on. And if I asked you to tell me, like, well, what did all those teams have in common? What did you see with them? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but it might be because I'm not doing so. Okay, here we go. I see trust. Someone dropped trust in. That what winning teams had in common was trust. Balanced scorecard, collaboration. What else? Communication, excellent team collaboration. All right, some answers coming in. I appreciate that. Buy-in. Yes, everybody on the team rowing in the same direction and bought in. Focus, common goal. Jovial, open, engaged, good intentions, desire, teamwork. Okay, all of this is good. All of this is good. Thank you so much for jumping in. And what I'll say is I've asked this question of hundreds of thousands of people, and they have given me 99.9% of the time an answer or set of answers that look exactly like the answers you just gave. And the answers you just gave and that 99.9% of the people give they all fall into this pattern that I discovered along the way. The pattern that is not sophisticated and hard to understand. By the way, some good answers still coming in here. Positive attitude, authenticity, knowledge of the common goal. So let me play back the pattern that all of you are sharing. And to do this, I want to call to mind a thought leader named Patrick Lencioni. Most people don't know Pat's name, but a lot of people have been exposed to his book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And Pat has committed his whole life and career to improving the world of work and helping teams become more cohesive and get on the same page. And what Pat says is that for teams to be successful, they have to be smart and they have to be healthy. Now, smart are things that are like competencies and hard skills, marketing, strategy, IT, finance, all of the things that we have departments for in our company. All of the competencies and skills that I could teach you in the classroom. And Pat says for organizations to succeed, they also have to be healthy. Minimal politics, minimal confusion, crystal clear clarity. And in Pat's experience, when teams don't succeed, it's not because they aren't smart enough. So if you think about smart is how we intellectually connect with each other and these competencies and skills. And Pat's saying that those are important. But the healthy is not how we intellectually connect. The healthy is how we interpersonally connect. And when I asked you what winning was, unprompted, you all gave me words that line up to the healthy. That, like Pat is saying, projects likely aren't failing because they aren't smart enough. They're likely failing because they aren't healthy, because there are politics, there is confusion. And if I click down from Pat's advice, that's what I saw as a CIO. For my teams to succeed, they had to be smart and healthy. Smart was great architecture, great engineering, great project management, quality assurance, stabilized operations and support. Healthy was minimal politics, minimal confusion, crystal clear clarity. And the fact of the matter is, when my projects failed, it wasn't because they weren't smart enough. It was because there was politics and there was confusion. And what's funny is when my projects would come off the tracks, I would try to fix them with smart stuff. We need smarter people. We need stronger processes. We need more governance. We need more methodologies. And the fact of the matter is that the answer was much simpler than that. That what people were lacking was this interpersonal connection, the healthy stuff. And when I asked you what you've seen, you have seen the same thing, that winning is about the healthy. Now, I don't want to discount the smart. The smart is table stakes, and you've got to be good at them. You've got to be good at the smarts, and you've got to have strong technology partners and platforms and methods to get work done. And your projects need to be healthy. Change and driving change has to be a healthy exercise, making sure that there's not politics and confusion and there's clarity. But here's what I want to emphasize. I want to emphasize to you that when I say healthy and interpersonal connection, I am not talking about touchy-feely, trust fall kind of stuff. I'm not talking about candle sniffing, eccentric people stuff where we're all holding hands and singing songs together and feeling like life is great. That is not what I mean when I say healthy. What I mean when I say healthy is that people are clear and that they don't have a bunch of confusion in their day-to-day work. And so today, I'm going to share with you a few tactics that we can use that help drive healthy. But they're not touchy-feely trust fall things. They are things that when we do them, they result in all of these things that you all have so eloquently laid out with authenticity and positive attitude and determination and inspirational goals and objectives. Those are the outcomes of the tactics. Now, in my book, People Before Things, which I will at the end of this tell you how to get a free copy of, I talk about 7 things that need to be in place that drive the healthy side of the equation. And we don't have time for those 7. So I'm going to go through just 3 of them today, maybe just 2, depending on time. And the goal for these things is for you to be able to promote the healthy side of your projects and to make sure that people are on the same page and that they are bought in. And these tactics that I share in the book, the 7 things that we can do, they're not criticisms. These are not things I just made up. These are things that are based on science and research and well tested over the years in my CIO journey. When Red Robin went from an $8 stock to an $89 stock in just a few years, we were using these principles. That's why I wanted to write this book. Red Robin is a public company. All the information I share with you is public domain information that's certifiable and verifiable. And that was a great test bed for many of these tactics that, from a science and research perspective, said, this is what people need to feel healthy and on the same page. So today we're going to talk about 3 root cause reasons why people are not on the same page with us. It's because they lack clarity. It's because they lack the time and priority. And it's because they have not had the opportunity to speak up and speak out about their ideas. And whether you are an executive leader in your organization or you are a grassroots influencer, these tactics are something that you can adopt in your day-to-day work. You don't have to have a whole department doing all these things all the time in an all or nothing way. Every little bit influences your ability to drive change successfully. So let's talk about clarity and time and priority and making sure that people feel heard. Let's talk about what that looks like in our day-to-day work. The first thing I want to talk about is clarity. And what does it mean to provide clarity and to clarify, especially when you're driving new innovation or new tech into your organization? What does your audience need clarity around? And what I want to delineate here is that what we often do in the tech world is we often get enamored and talk a lot about the what. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to implement. And by the way, that's not unique to the IT world. When I got my MBA and went to business school, by nature of talking about strategy and vision and mission, a lot of those conversations are, here's what an organization is going to do. When we roll out new tech and new innovation to the organizations we serve, and we start to define that work in the context of what, it does not clarify for people or for our audience what it is that we're actually doing. Let me give you an example. When I worked at Red Robin, we asked 26,000 team members, hey, in the next 6 months, if you were going to leave Red Robin, why would you leave? And it was an open-ended question. It wasn't some multiple choice survey. And when the team came back to us, basically people communicated that they didn't feel grown and developed. They didn't feel like there was a career path for them. They didn't feel like they were getting good training in the restaurants. They felt ill-equipped many times during a busy shift to succeed. Now, we went through that information and data as an executive team, and this was 2011, and decided that we wanted to create some breakthrough technology that was going to help develop our people. And what we knew was that 87% of our workforce were millennials, and millennials don't work in analog. So to train them with training manuals that were really fat and thick that they had to just read wasn't going to work. So we devised a strategy to build interactive games and simulations on iPads and deploy those across our 500 restaurants. That doesn't sound like a big deal today. I acknowledge that. 2011, it was a huge deal, especially because we were knocking on the door of Apple, who said, hey, we're not an enterprise company. We don't help you deploy this stuff from an enterprise perspective. So we had to work through a lot of the details about deploying 5 to 7 iPads for every one of our 500 restaurants. But in essence, we were focused on building something that was going to be really cool for those millennials. Now, imagine if when we devised that plan, I started going through the organization, knocking door to door, trying to build advocacy, but I focused on the what. Imagine if I was just focusing on, hey, we're going to deploy iPads. Or what if I even used a traditional phrase like learning management system? We're going to deploy a learning management system. You know, people might hear a learning management system and they might say, I know what learning is. I know what management is. I know what system is, but I don't know what a learning management system is. And so therefore, they have no clarity whatsoever around what it is I'm going to do. Now, the opposite also holds true. What if I was calling those interactive games and simulations on iPads with leaderboards? What if I was referencing that as learning management system, and an audience of people, they were like, oh, yeah, I used to work at Red Lobster. I know what a learning management system is. I used to work at Chili's. And they might think that learning management system was this boring computer-based training module that they have to sit in an office on an old dusty computer in a restaurant and watch hours and hours and hours of boring content. And do you see that in both of those scenarios, either they've had experience with learning management systems in the past, or they've never had experience with learning management systems, that by me talking about the what, it didn't really clarify. Because you either had people that had a false notion of what was going to happen based on past experiences, or you had people that had no clue. I did not do that. Instead, we had an annual conference at Red Robin. And during that annual conference, we brought in all of our general managers and assistant managers from across the country. We had an audience of thousands of people. And we would get on stage and help them understand what we were going to be focused on for the year. And so instead of getting on the stage and banging on about iPads and interactive simulations and learning management systems and words that don't mean anything to people that don't have some context around it, I focused on the why, just talking about the why. And in this case, it was easy for me to get on the stage and say to the managers, hey, we asked the 26,000 people that report to all of you in this room, what's the number one reason they're going to leave Red Robin? And they told us that they don't feel grown and developed. And we want to do something about that. Do you see the difference in that communication strategy? Clarity is around the why we exist, why we're doing this, why now, why is this important? You pick any of those phrases. If you think about small kids, the first words out of their mouth as kids is why? Why are we doing this? And I just think in our day-to-day work, we get so busy and we're so focused on getting things done. We assume people know why, and they don't. And so we should be leading the conversation with the why. We should start there, helping connect them. You know, a lot of times we all work with co-executive sponsors or executive sponsors that are from the business, which is another conversation for another day because we put ourselves in the corner by calling everyone else the business. We are just as much the business as the business. But let's say you're working with an executive sponsor who's in the business. You can't assume that they're going to go out and build advocacy by talking about the why. They too may get very focused on the what. And their what might be full of a bunch of vagary, like, you know, oh, we're going to roll out new tech. That doesn't mean anything to most people. And in fact, it's pretty scary. So we know we have created clarity when people know why we're doing what we're doing. From simple things like I'm running a maintenance window on a Friday night and taking the systems down, to bigger things like I'm getting ready to roll out iPads and to throw the old training manuals away. In either one of those scenarios, we must lead with why something is important. Now, let's also talk about the practical reality of what gets in the way once we start having a conversation with people about the why. Because it turns out that even when we're on the same page about why something is important, sometimes people still seem to refuse to take action on some new change or innovation that we're rolling out. And this speaks to people's busyness. We have a disease in corporate America where we hold out and honor things like busyness. We believe that the people that are the most successful, the companies that are most successful, they have just automatically figured out how to balance all of their priorities. And that we too, to be strong and to win, we've got to pile our day up with a bunch of work. And the fact of the matter is, when we're driving change and transformation and innovation into our organizations, if we want people to take action, we have to make sure they have the time of day to take action. Let me share with you a fun study that was done on the campus of Princeton University. 1973, two psychologists, Darley and Batson, invited a group of seminarians to give a talk on the Good Samaritan. For those of you that don't know, the Good Samaritan is a Bible study. And Darley and Batson, they divided the students into three groups. And the first group, they told them to show up at an appointed time and place, and Darley and Batson greeted them. And they were supposed to give this talk on the Good Samaritan. But when that first group showed up, Darley and Batson said, hey, listen, bad news. This talk you're supposed to give on the Good Samaritan, it's actually on the other side of campus, but you have enough time to get there. So if you leave now, you'll be able to make it in time. And those students shuffled off to the other side of campus to go do their talk on the Good Samaritan. Now, Darley and Batson, they invited a second group, and they met the second group at the appointed time and place. And they did the same thing. When the students showed up, Darley and Batson said, hey, bad news. The talk you're supposed to give on the Good Samaritan, it's actually on the other side of campus, and you have just enough time to get there. Now, the third group, the group that was really going to get beat up in this social experiment, when they showed up, Darley and Batson met them at the appointed time and place. They did the exact same thing. He said to the students, hey, bad news. The talk you're supposed to give on the Good Samaritan, it's on the other side of the campus. And even worse news, you're already late. So those students shuffled off. Now, these three groups of students, between where they were and the other side of campus where they had to give the talk, Darley and Batson planted a man on the sidewalk. And as the students approached the man on the sidewalk, the man was saying, please help. I need your help. And the students didn't know, like, had this guy just gotten beaten up? Has he had a medical condition? Is he just drunk? All they knew was that he needed help. Now, for the students who had more than enough time to get to the other side of campus, 63% of them stopped and helped the man. For the second group, who had just enough time, only 45% of those students stopped to help the man. And finally, the group that was late, that was already behind schedule, of that group, only 10% stopped and helped the man on the sidewalk. Now, a part of the story that I didn't tell you is that when Darley and Batson invited the seminarians to participate in this experiment, they had put the seminarians through a values assessment. And they basically selected a group of students who shared the exact same values. Which, if you think about it, the Good Samaritan is a Bible story about helping a man on the sidewalk. And even though helping somebody was completely connected to their values, or said another way, was completely connected to the why, they still didn't stop to help when they didn't have enough time. Now, what we do in the tech world is that we oftentimes build our plans around the capacity and the time of our own team. So when I'm talking about time here, I am saying that you should be thinking about the capacity of the people doing the work within IT. But I'm also talking about your end users, that your end users have a lot of things going on. In fact, it's almost like one of the busiest airports in the country, Chicago O'Hare Airport, where if you were watching an air traffic control screen, there'd be lots of planes swirling around the runway looking to land. And air traffic control can't simply let those planes just land whenever they want to land. You have to bring them in a manner that's safe and orderly. That's the way change works. When we're driving change, it's like an airplane swirling around the airport. And it turns out there are other airplanes swirling around the airport too. And we can't just land the plane at a time that is just convenient for us. We have to carefully coordinate with the other things going on in the organization. Now, you may be watching this and thinking, well, Chris, why do I have to pay attention to all the things that are going on in the organization outside of my project? Why do I have to be an air traffic controller? And the answer is really easy. Most change initiatives that are happening in organizations, they require the hands of our IT team to get that work done. So as an example, if I was going to roll out those iPads with the interactive games and simulations, but I was going to roll them out in the middle of November when HR was running open enrollment for brand new benefit programs for our team, I am going to fail no matter what I do with my project. And yet, I could argue, well, for 18 months, we had planned to roll those iPads out in that exact moment. Why did HR come along and just drop the open enrollment plane on the runway? You could argue that, or you could look at it and say, yeah, but this is the opportunity we have in IT. Because it turns out that to load the new benefit providers into the system so that we could do open enrollment, it required the hands of IT. We actually had a unique, unduplicated role in the organization that put us in the air traffic controller spot. A couple of other things I want to say about priorities here. I meet a lot of people who are the victim of their priorities, that they've got a lot of things going on and they have no say on whether or not those things should be done or not. I will tell you that more times than not, that is not what happens. More times than not, we're trying to be good soldiers. We're doing what someone asked us to do. But if that someone that had asked us to do that was given some information that let them know what everything was that was going on, they might make a different decision. Now, letting them know is not, don't give them an Excel spreadsheet with like 50 lines of here's all the projects I have going on. Give them something that makes them see something, that makes them feel something, that makes them want to do something. I used to create a visual that looks just like this, where I had the different rings of a bullseye, and the middle of the ring was complete, and the outer ring was discovery. And then I had to do design work, and then I had to do development, and then implementation, and then complete. And I would show the planes and literally use planes with the names of projects. And of course, the closer those planes were to the bullseye, the closer they were to being complete. And by showing executives something visual that depicts the things that are happening, and they see a picture that looks like a pimply high school kid, they will start to get the impression that things are really busy. But organizations, they keep doing busy work because they think someone above them wants them to do that. And I can tell you from sitting in executive meetings that a lot of times we would sit around as an executive team and be like, what's everybody working on? We didn't have visibility that all of us had asked for all of these things and that people were busy doing busy work. The last thing I want to say about capacity and how you can impact this in your own day-to-day work and make sure that you're freeing up time for the things that are most important. Keep this in mind. Prioritization doesn't have to be a yes-no decision. You don't have to be the department of no. Prioritization is a when decision. When are we going to do this? And when I think about how to filter that, I think about people using a filter of what's important. So when I say to people, why are you so busy? They'll say, well, I have to do these things because they're important. That's like the justification for all the things on their plate. That's important. That's important. That's important. Change the filter. The filter should be what's most important right now. That's where we should be focused. That's where we have to take control of this capacity thing. Okay, the last point I want to make, this is the third thing. So if the first reason why people aren't on the same page with us and things aren't healthy, it's because they aren't clarified around, we are not clarifying around things that need to be done, or that people don't have the time of day. The third main reason why people are slow to the take is because they haven't had the opportunity to weigh in. People need to weigh in before they buy in. Now, to weigh in, we as leaders driving change into our organizations can invite people to participate in the process, to give us feedback. So as an example, if I were going to roll out those iPads, I might ask the general managers, hey, when you hear me talk about rolling out iPads that are going to have interactive games and simulations that's going to help grow and develop your team members, what's the one thing you're concerned about? And then take that feedback in, and whatever some of the bigger topics and more pervasive points are, create an action plan around it. What I'm doing is I'm saying to people, it's safe here, that I'm not going to just roll change out to you and not continue to make it better and not continue to get your feedback. You know, this is labeled on this slide as stakeholder engagement. I know that's fancy. People have asked me, why don't you just label it listening? Because it's not just about listening. When we ask somebody for feedback, it's also about taking demonstrable action. A mentor of mine once told me that people think the worst thing you could do is not ask other people for feedback. And actually, the worst thing you could do is ask people for feedback and then proceed to do nothing about it. So the combo deal of listening plus taking demonstrable action is what comes together to create stakeholder engagement. At Red Robin, when we decided to do these interactive games and simulations on the iPads, we sent out a global message to our restaurants. And I said, I'm looking for 50 restaurants. We want 10% of our system to participate in a pilot where we are going to deploy these iPads to you. Now, there were some rules related to it. The rules were that the program was take it, tweak it, and share it. So the rules of the program is that when we were in this emerging tech stage, things weren't going to work perfectly. They needed to understand that the take it piece is that they were taking something that was incomplete and imperfect. They needed to understand that the second part of the requirement was that they had to help tweak it. That when things didn't work the way we thought they would work or they should work, that they were going to have to find solutions. And then the third rule was that if you found a solution, a tweak that helps fix this platform and make it better, you got to share that with the other 49 restaurants. This take it, tweak it, share it program is an example of stakeholder engagement. It's giving people the opportunity to weigh in on the things that are not working the way they thought it was going to work. If people don't feel like they get a chance to weigh in and they feel like they're on a dead end road and that the new tech that's rolling out doesn't work, but nobody cares, that is the recipe for the 70% of the workforce that's disengaged right now in the US. Instead, the take it, tweak it, share it approach is giving people the opportunity to surface the problems that we might not have seen. But most importantly, don't let them just put the problems at your doorstep. Invite them to put solutions at your doorstep. And I cannot even tell you how many things that were identified during that pilot period that if we had worked on this program for 3 to 4 years to make sure it was perfect, we still wouldn't have known. If I give you an example, in those early days, we were driving updates to content. Those updates in the content had to happen on the iPads. When people turned on the iPads, if they had to wait for a lot of updates, it killed the experience. So we had to figure out, how do we drive updates to the iPads when they're in idle state? Now, at the time, there wasn't mobile device management. Those solutions did not exist. At the time, we heard about, just sort of randomly, a company called Real, I was going to say Real Player, but it wasn't Real Player. player sync player. I'm definitely in this moment. If I fall down and pass out, it's like, hey, right before he passed out, he started having memory loss. Anyway, PlayerLink. It was called PlayerLink. Sorry. And PlayerLink was a technology, a company that was basically building NFL playbooks and putting them on iPads. And it was important because when teams got players that they were going to cut, they didn't want the players taking the playbooks with them to the new teams. And when you had the old paper-based playbooks, that was what was happening. So PlayerLink had devised a technology to be able to grab off of that iPad when it was in idle state content and remove it. So in effect, we were getting a mobile device management solution from a solution that wasn't necessarily designed or thought of for anything other than the NFL. And so that's my point. That stuff would have never come up. We would have never thought of that if we didn't have a take it, tweak it, share it program. Okay, so here's where I want to finish the conversation. I want to finish the conversation by encouraging you to not take an all or nothing approach. It's easy to hear this stuff and say, my boss is never going to buy into this. I don't have the time to try to figure out how all this stuff works that you're talking about, Chris, and to do this right now. That is going to be the enemy of progress. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Instead, I'm encouraging you to just get 1% better a day at this. And 1% of your day is 15 minutes. To devote yourself in 15 minutes a day to your learning and your tactics and your toolbox around what you're going to do to drive clarity to people in an organization, to make sure they have the time they need to be successful, and to make sure you're asking them for their feedback and their opinions. And there are 4 other tactics that are in my book that you could also spend some time on, but it's not just me. You don't have to just get it from me. Listen to podcasts, read books, talk to other leaders. Give yourself that 1%. If you got 1% better every day for a year, you would finish the year 38 times better. That's what the math says. Compounding benefits. 1% times 1% times 1% for a year is 38 times better. You don't have to go all or nothing, but you can't afford to just do nothing. That is not an option. I want you to hear me say that the work you do is incredibly important. There might be days that you're feeling down and out with the work you're doing. You may feel like people don't value it. You may feel like people in the business are using you like a punching bag. You can be a change maker. You can absolutely make a difference. These small tweaks that I'm talking about on a 1% basis will continue to help you build bridges. Okay, if you go to the URL that's at the bottom of this slide, peoplebeforethingsbook.com, you can get a free digital download of my book. And you can run that on any kind of e-reader that you like to use. And I hope that you take me up on that. There's all kinds of tactics and tools in there. And the reason why I wrote the book is because I was tired of reading books about the work we do in IT from people who had never been in IT. And the second thing is I'd like to invite all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You don't have to just hit the follower button. You can hit the connect. I do not use it as a marketing tool. I use LinkedIn purely to make connections with people like you who are doing the work that you do every day and to share content. So I hope that you take me up on that. Thank you so much for your time today, for having me here. And I hope that all of you make it a great day during this conference. See you later. Bye.